The room went silent before she reached the table. Not polite silent. Not the quiet that happens when someone important walks in. The other kind. The kind that happens when something occurs that people have no framework for. 8 board members. 8 people who had spent the last 3 months reading articles about her vulnerability. About her distraction. About whether a CEO in a wheelchair could still lead a 400-person company through a hostile acquisition attempt. They had their answer now. She was walking, no chair, no walker. No one beside her, slowly, deliberately. Every step its own decision. The man at the far end of the table, the one who had voted against her, the one whose prior relationship with Morrison Capital her legal team was still investigating, watched her come toward him and did not move. His face did something complicated. Something that was not quite shame and not quite surprise, but lived in the neighborhood of both. She reached the head of the table, set her hands flat on the surface, looked at him directly, and said nothing, because she didn't have to. What nobody in that room knew, what none of them had been willing to believe, was that 4 months ago, a man pushing a cleaning cart had knocked on her office door at 11 o'clock at night and made her a promise. Atlanta Memorial Hospital, 5 years before, the waiting room smelled like old coffee and quiet grief. Darnell Cooper sat on the floor, not in a chair, the floor, his back against the cold wall, his legs stretched out in front of him, his daughter Zoe asleep on his chest, 3 months old, too small, warm like a secret the world hadn't discovered yet. Around him, people moved. Nurses walked fast with that particular efficiency of people who had learned not to slow down. A television in the corner played the late news with the sound turned low. Someone down the hall was crying, steady, rhythmic, the sound of someone who had been crying for a long time. Darnell didn't move. He had been sitting there for 2 hours and 43 minutes. He knew because he kept checking the clock above the nurse's station. Not because he was waiting for news. Not anymore. The news had come 40 minutes ago, delivered by a young resident who spoke carefully, like someone who had practiced the words but hadn't yet learned to carry them easily. Traumatic brain injury. The intersection of Peachtree and 5th. The other driver had run a red light. Denise had been coming home from her night shift at the grocery store, 3 blocks from their apartment. She had probably been thinking about whether Zoe was still asleep, whether Darnell had remembered to warm the bottle. She hadn't made it home. Darnell had understood every word the doctor said. The information had arrived clearly, had been processed clearly, but something in his chest had gone very quiet afterward, like a room where someone has cut the power. Everything still there. Furniture, walls, floor, just dark. Zoe stirred against him, made a small sound, somewhere between a sigh and a complaint. He pressed his hand gently against her back, that slow circular motion she had liked since the first week of her life. She settled. Her breath evened out. He kept his hand moving, kept watching the clock. At some point he couldn't have said exactly when something caught his eye at the far end of the corridor. A man sitting in a wheelchair outside one of the rehabilitation rooms, maybe 60 feet away, somewhere around 50 years old. Broad shoulders, the kind built from years of physical work rather than a gym. One of those faces that had looked directly at hard things and not looked away. His legs were covered with a thin hospital blanket, slightly askew, like he'd been pulling at it. A physical therapist stood beside him, young woman clipboard in hand, the professional patience of someone who had done this many times. She was saying something Darnell couldn't hear. The man gripped the armrests of the wheelchair. He pushed himself up. His legs shook badly the moment they took weight. One foot slipped on the linoleum. He went down hard, caught the armrest just before he hit the floor, saved himself from a fall but not from the cost of nearly falling. The therapist reached toward him. He waved her off with one hand. A gesture that was not angry, just clear. This is mine to do. He pushed himself up again. His whole body was involved in it, shoulders, arms, neck, the locked jaw of someone spending everything they had on one thing. He stood for perhaps 5 seconds. Then his left knee buckled, and he went down again, controlled this time, lowering himself back into the chair with whatever he had left. The therapist spoke again. Darnell could see her body language, careful, professional, encouraging. The man shook his head. He gripped the armrests for the 3rd time. Darnell watched this for a long time. He watched a man fall and stand and fall, and stand in a fluorescent-lit hallway at 2 in the morning, with no audience and no applause, and nothing guaranteed. The man did not look heroic. He looked exhausted. He looked like someone who had used up everything except the decision to keep trying and was running that decision on pure stubbornness now, like an engine running on fumes. Darnell had spent 3 years as a combat medic in the army. He had seen the body do extraordinary things and terrible things. He understood, in a way most people didn't, what the human nervous system could survive and what it couldn't. He had held pressure on wounds in conditions that textbooks described but couldn't fully prepare you for. But he had never seen anything that looked exactly like that. Like someone choosing, second by second, not to stop. Zoe made another sound against his chest. He looked down at her. This small person. This whole unwritten future. Sleeping like the world was entirely trustworthy. Like there was nothing it could do that she needed to worry about yet. He thought about Denise. The specific way she laughed when something genuinely surprised her, sudden, unguarded, nothing like her regular laugh. The way she always fell asleep reading and then insisted, with complete conviction, that she hadn't been sleeping. The way she had held Zoe for the first time in the delivery room, both arms, both hands, like she was holding something she already knew was the most important thing she would ever hold, and cried without making any sound at all. He looked back down the hallway. The man was standing again. Something shifted in Darnell Cooper at 2:17 in the morning in a hospital waiting room. The way things shift that don't make noise when they move. Not a decision, he announced. Not something he could have explained right then if someone had asked. Just a quiet turning the way a river finds a new channel, not all at once but stone by stone, degree by degree. He was going to learn how to help people do what that man was doing. He was going to spend whatever working life he had left in those moments, the unremarkable ones. The ones that happened in fluorescent light at 2 in the morning with nothing guaranteed and nobody watching. He kissed the top of Zoe's head. Carefully, so she wouldn't wake. "I'm going to do something that matters," he told her, very quietly. "I don't know everything it looks like yet, but I'm going to figure it out." She slept right through it. He sat with her for another hour before he let himself think about what came next. Cole Tower, Atlanta, 47th floor, 11:02 p.m. 5 years later, the 47th floor had a particular quality of silence at 11 o'clock at night. Not peaceful, corporate. The silence of a space that had been built for maximum output during designated hours and simply waited. Lights dimmed for those hours to return. The marble floors reflected the corridor lighting in long, clean lines. The air carried the faint, neutral smell of recycled climate control. Darnell Cooper pushed his cleaning cart along the corridor with the unhurried efficiency of someone who had learned exactly how much effort each task required. The wheels made a low, steady sound that he had long since stopped hearing. 3 years of night shifts left you comfortable in spaces that weren't built for you. You learned to move through them without disturbing anything. He was 28 years old. During the day, during the hours between when he dropped Zoe at school and when he picked her up, he attended the University of Georgia's Doctor of Physical Therapy program. Year 4. He was 8 months from his degree. His GPA sat at 3.9, a number he had defended through 2 years of working nights, and a thesis on neuroplasticity in incomplete spinal injuries that currently ran to 67 pages and was not finished. His supervising professor, Dr. Patricia Johnson, precise, demanding, the kind of educator who gave genuine praise rarely and therefore made it mean something, had told him last week that she expected his thesis to be publishable. He had thanked her. Then gone home, made dinner, gotten Zoe to bed, and driven to Cole Tower for his shift. This was his life. It was not simple. But it was moving in a direction, and the direction was the one he had chosen on a hospital floor 5 years ago, and that mattered more to him than the simplicity would have. He had a system for the 47th floor. Back to front, saving the executive suites for last because they required care. Most nights the corner offices were empty by 9. The people who worked in them had places to be: dinners, families, the ordinary life that happened outside buildings like this one. Tonight the light was on under the door at the far end of the hallway, a thin line of yellow against the marble. He noticed it when he turned the last corner. He paused, listening. No sound from inside. He knocked twice gently. "Come in," said a voice, controlled. Tired in a specific way, not the tiredness of someone who hadn't slept, but the tiredness of someone managing something large and doing it by force of will. Feminine. The kind of voice that had learned, over many years of professional necessity, to give nothing away. Darnell opened the door. He assessed the room the way a medic assessed a scene, quickly, completely, without making it obvious. Dark wood desk, documents in 3 organized stacks, 2 empty water bottles, a bottle of ibuprofen, not prescription medication, he noted this specifically, a cell phone with a small crack in the corner of the case, a tray with the remnants of a meal that had been eaten hours ago, and behind the desk, Sandra Anderson. He knew who she was. Everyone in the building knew who she was. CEO of Anderson Industries, 35 years old, had grown the company's technology infrastructure division from 40 employees to 412 in 6 years, a trajectory that had been covered in 3 national business publications. The press described her as brilliant, demanding, and difficult to read, usually in that order. What the press coverage had mentioned, more recently, was the wheelchair, a skiing accident 6 months ago. The coverage had been careful about details. Her legal team was good, but enough had come out. A serious spinal injury, surgery, recovery timeline uncertain. She was still composed. Strong features, careful posture in the chair, her hair pulled back with the precision of someone who had decided their appearance would not slip regardless of what else was slipping. She wore a dark blazer over a deep burgundy blouse. Everything about the visible surface said, "I am managing this room and everything in it." But Darnell had spent 3 years studying the body's compensations. He wasn't looking at the surface. Left shoulder elevated approximately 3 centimeters above the right. Breathing pattern shallow and controlled, the specific shallowness of someone who had been bracing against pain, long enough that it had become automatic, a habit the body had developed to protect itself. Her left hand held a pen, but the thumb wasn't fully closing around it. The grip was compensated, the opposition between thumb and forefinger slightly off. Her core muscles were working visibly harder than they should be just to maintain seated posture. Incomplete T12 fracture. 6 months post-injury, he knew this presentation because he had studied it for 4 years, had written 40 pages specifically on it, had spent hours in simulation labs working through the neuromechanics with professors who had treated this injury type for decades. She was not recovering correctly. "I can come back later," he said. "There are other officers on this floor." She looked up, properly not the reflexive, non-registering glance that people in her position often gave to service staff. She looked at him the way someone looks when they are actually deciding whether to engage. "It's fine. I'll be here all night regardless." She gestured at the documents with a slight motion of her non-pen hand. "Board presentation in the morning. I review everything twice now." "It takes longer," she said it without self-pity and without invitation to respond. Stating a condition of her current existence the way you'd describe the weather. He moved to the far corner of the office and began his work. This was the job: move through the space, do what needed doing, leave things better than you found them, disturb nothing that didn't need disturbing, but he was still watching her. The way she reached for the ibuprofen without looking at it, automatic, a gesture repeated many times daily. The way she pressed 2 fingers to her right temple briefly before returning her attention to the page. The slight tremor in her hand when she turned documents. He had seen this pattern before. Not in patients exactly, in soldiers. The ones who had sustained injuries and kept operating on sheer discipline, treating every signal from their body as a weakness to be overridden rather than information to be heard. They were often the most capable people he worked with. They were also the ones who broke in the most expensive ways when the override finally failed. He finished the far corner, moved toward the windows along the east wall. "Miss Anderson," she looked up. "When did you last take a real break? Not 10 minutes between documents. A genuine one." The office held a particular quality of quiet for a moment. She studied him, not with offense that would have been easier, with the focused attention of someone who had received an unexpected input and was determining what category it belonged to. "Hey? That's an interesting question from someone I haven't spoken to before," she said. "I ask because I'm watching you manage pain you're not acknowledging. The way you're sitting, your breathing, your left hand, a pause. I'm fine. You're compensating," he said. "That's not the same thing." She set her pen down, completely. Not a pause, a stop. "Do you know who I am?" "Yes, ma'am. You're Sandra Anderson. You run this company. Then you understand why scheduled breaks aren't a feature of my current situation. I understand why you've decided that. he said. I'm not sure the decision is right. Another pause. Longer. He kept working. She should have ended the conversation. Most people with her level of authority, in her position, would have a polite dismissal, a return to the documents, a door that remained professionally closed. It was the sensible response to a maintenance worker offering unsolicited observations about her health. She didn't end it. Maybe it was the hour. Maybe it was the accumulated weight of 6 months of managing everything at full intensity with a body that wasn't cooperating, and a business world watching for signs of weakness. Maybe it was simply that he had spoken to her, like someone who expected to be taken seriously, and she was someone who responded to that quality regardless of its source. What makes you think you have any basis for that observation? Darnell stopped what he was doing. He turned and faced her directly. Miss Anderson, I'm a 4th-year physical therapy student at UGA. Before that, I spent 3 years as a combat medic in the Army, specializing in trauma and rehabilitation. Spinal injuries are the focus of my thesis work. He let that sit for a moment. Your left shoulder is 3 centimeters high. Your thumb opposition on that hand tells me your thoracic musculature is significantly fatigued. Your breathing pattern is a protective response to chronic pain that's been going on long enough to become automatic. Everything I'm seeing suggests an incomplete T12 fracture, approximately 6 months post-injury, with a rehabilitation program that isn't targeting the right things. Sandra Anderson did not move. I've worked this floor for 3 years, he continued. I've observed you before the accident and after. You returned to this office 4 weeks post-surgery. You kept your schedule. You adjusted nothing. That observation is not a criticism, he said. It's data. And the data suggests that the people managing your recovery are excellent surgeons who may not be the right people to be managing your recovery. She was very still. My medical team is considered the best in Atlanta. The best surgical team in Atlanta, he said. Surgery and rehabilitation are distinct disciplines. The person most qualified to repair damage is not always the most qualified person to rebuild function. Those are different problems. He held her gaze. I can help you walk again, Miss Anderson. The office was completely quiet. Outside the windows 47 floors below, Atlanta continued its late-night existence. Traffic signals changed. Headlights moved along Peachtree in steady streams. The city breathed its ordinary nighttime breath. In the office, Sandra Anderson sat very still and looked at a man who had just said the thing she had spent 6 months refusing to let herself want. You clean offices, she said, not unkindly. Precisely. Tonight I do, he said. I'm also 8 months from my degree. My GPA is 3.9. My thesis on neuroplasticity in incomplete spinal recovery has been called the strongest student work my professor has seen in 10 years. I've co-authored a paper in the Journal of Neurological Physical Therapy on motor pathway recovery. Why would you offer this? He thought about a hospital floor, about a man who kept getting up, about a daughter who had been sleeping against his chest while he decided what his life was going to be about. Because I've spent 4 years training to help people that the standard system has stopped expecting to improve, and I believe you're someone who's been underestimated by that system. She looked at him for a long time. The way a scientist looks at a result that deviates from every prediction, not with excitement, not yet, but with the specific attention of someone who is searching rigorously for the error and beginning to suspect they won't find one. Good night, Mr. Cooper, she said. He nodded, finished his work, left quietly, pulled the door closed behind him. In the elevator going down, he exhaled once, slowly. He had said what needed to be said. Whatever happened next was not something he could control. He had learned to make peace with that. Anderson Industries' executive floor. The following morning, Brenda Wright had worked for Sandra Anderson for 7 years. In that time, she had coordinated 12 international trips, managed the communications during 2 separate corporate crises, negotiated with 3 sets of legal counsel on Sandra's behalf, and politely informed a sitting board member that he could not enter Sandra's office without a confirmed appointment. She had done all of this because she was thorough, because she was loyal in the way that came from genuine respect rather than obligation, and because she had developed, over 7 years, an accurate instinct for what Sandra needed before Sandra named it. When Sandra called at 7:41 in the morning and said, I need a complete background on a building services employee named Darnell Cooper. Everything you can find. I need it by 10. Brenda didn't ask why. She got to work. The file was on Sandra's desk at 9:52. Sandra opened it without ceremony. Darnell James Cooper, 28 years old, Atlanta, Georgia, born and raised. Current position, building services, coal tower, night shift, education, University of Georgia, Doctor of Physical Therapy program. Anticipated completion in approximately 8 months. GPA 3.9. Academic Excellence Award in the previous academic year. Co-author, Motor Pathway Recovery Patterns in Incomplete Spinal Lesions, a prospective case analysis. Published in the Journal of Neurological Physical Therapy. The paper had 12 citations in peer literature, prior service, United States Army, Medical Corps, 3 years active duty. Specialty listed as trauma and rehabilitation medicine. Honorably discharged. Darnell had been recommended for a commendation during his second deployment. She didn't push for the details, but the commendation existed. Faculty letters. She read both. The first, from his academic advisor, noted his technical precision and research instincts. The second, from his program director, Dr. Patricia Johnson, contained a passage that Brenda had marked in yellow. Mr. Cooper possesses a clinical intuition I encounter perhaps once in a decade of teaching. He understands not merely the mechanics of recovery, but the internal experience of a patient who has been told to abandon hope. This is not a teachable quality. It is a quality that, when present, defines the difference between competent practice and transformative care. Sandra read the passage twice. She continued through the file. No criminal record, no civil judgments, no financial irregularities beyond the ordinary circumstances of a graduate student working 2 jobs. He rented a 2-bedroom apartment in East Atlanta. He drove a 2018 Honda Civic with 114,000 miles on the odometer. Near the bottom of the file, a section that Brenda had included carefully and without comment, because she had worked with Sandra for 7 years and knew that Sandra would want to know: marital status, widowed, dependent. 1 daughter, Zoe Cooper, age 5, spouse Denise Cooper, deceased. Automobile accident 5 years prior. Records indicate Mr. Cooper was employed in construction at the time of his wife's death and subsequently enlisted in the Army Medical Corps, later transitioning to graduate study in physical therapy. Sandra stopped reading. She sat back in her chair and looked at the window. Atlanta was fully awake outside. Morning light coming hard off the glass of the buildings across the street. Traffic moving in the coordinated, irregular rhythm of a city at 9 in the morning. She sat with what she had just read. A man who lost his wife and did not collapse into the loss, but built something from its direction. Who worked nights in a building like this one to pay for the training he needed, to help people recover from the kinds of injuries that the people who could afford better care sometimes didn't recover from. Who had walked into her office at 11 o'clock at night with a cleaning cart and told her, with complete steadiness, that her medical team was excellent at the wrong thing. Who had a daughter who had been asleep on his chest, probably, in a hospital 5 years ago, while he was making some decision she couldn't see. She had spent 6 months being told by excellent people, qualified people, people she respected, that her body had reached a boundary, that the work was in acceptance. That adjustment was what healing looked like now. She looked at the file again. Then she looked at the passage. Dr. Johnson had written one more time. He understands not merely the mechanics of recovery, but the internal experience of a patient who has been told to abandon hope. Brenda, she said. Brenda appeared in the doorway within 4 seconds. Find out what time Mr. Cooper's shift ends tonight. I want him in my office before he leaves the building. Sandra's office that evening, 11:18 p.m. He knocked at the same time as the night before. Come in, same voice, but with something different in it, a deliberateness that hadn't been there at 11 p.m. the previous night. Like she had been thinking about the door opening, the documents on the desk had been reorganized. One stack cleared entirely. In its place, a single manila folder, scented precisely. Sit down, she said. He sat. She opened the folder and rotated it across the desk toward him, his own background file. Complete. He looked at it, then looked at her. You move quickly, he said. I always do. She let a moment pass. Your program director wrote that you understand the psychology of patients who've been told not to hope. She said it's not teachable. She's generous with her assessments. Is it accurate? He took the question seriously before answering it. I think when someone has been told enough times that something is impossible, they stop just believing it, they start building their life around the belief. The impossibility becomes part of how they understand themselves. And when someone suggests the impossibility might not be fixed, that's not just hopeful. That's threatening. It requires them to dismantle something they've already built. She studied him. Is that what you believe happened to me? I think you were told something conclusive by people whose authority you had every reason to trust. And you're too precise a thinker to dismiss expert consensus without strong reason. So you accepted the conclusion, and you think the conclusion was wrong? I think the surgical assessment was accurate. The injury was what they said it was. He leaned forward slightly. I think the ceiling they placed on recovery was not based on your specific neurology. It was based on population averages for your injury class. Those are different things. She was quiet. Explain the difference. He talked for 14 minutes. She didn't interrupt once. He explained incomplete spinal cord injuries, the critical distinction between pathways that were damaged and pathways that were absent. He explained neuroplasticity, the brain's documented capacity to establish new neural routes around damaged areas, to essentially find detours to destinations that the original roads no longer reached. He explained that this capacity did not diminish because a surgeon had said it didn't exist. It existed in the research literature with increasing clarity. He explained why surgical prognosis and rehabilitative prognosis were generated by different disciplines using different methodologies, and why conflating them produced systematically pessimistic outcomes for patients in her injury category. He explained what he had observed in her presentation the previous night, the specific compensation patterns, what they indicated about which pathways were still functioning, what that suggested about what was potentially reachable. Based on what I assessed, he said, your preserved neural function is being significantly underutilized, not because your body lacks capacity, because your current program isn't targeting the right mechanisms. The silence afterward had a different quality than the silences before. There's a liability question, she said. Yes, you don't hold a license yet, which is why we do this through proper channels. He had thought about this through the previous night's shift, through the drive home, through making Zoe's breakfast and getting her to school and sitting in his car in the school parking lot for 10 minutes working through the details. I contact Dr. Patricia Johnson, my program director at UGA, and formally request a supervised clinical practicum designation. Every protocol I develop gets reviewed and co-signed by her before implementation. You sign a comprehensive informed consent document. Dr. Harris, your surgical team's lead, receives full documentation and reviews every phase change. Nothing proceeds without his sign-off. Raymond Harris believes this is not a productive use of anyone's time, she said. I know. You communicated that last night. He doesn't need to believe it will work. He needs to confirm that the protocol poses no risk of harm. That's a narrower question, and I'm confident of the answer. She looked at him. You've prepared for this conversation. Since last night, why does this matter enough to you to prepare for it? He gave her the true answer. Because I understand what it is to be in a room where something irreplaceable is gone, and to have to figure out how to build forward from that. You're doing that. You're just doing it with a blueprint that was drawn by someone who didn't fully account for what you're actually capable of. The office was very still. Sandra Anderson had built a professional career on the discipline of not showing her hand. It was not accidental. It was a skill she had developed with intention over 15 years, refined through situations that had required it. Something moved in her eyes regardless. One condition, she said, name it, no false hope, ever. If the data says we've reached the limit, you tell me directly. No softening, no rerouting. That's the only way I know how to work. Then we have an agreement. She extended her hand across the desk. He shook it. Her grip was firm and deliberate, the handshake of someone who understood that this gesture meant something. 6 a.m., he said. I'll be here. He left. The elevator down, the lobby, the parking lot, the drive through Atlanta at 11:30, the city thinned to its late-night configuration. He called Dr. Johnson from the car. She picked up on the third ring, which meant she was still working. He explained the situation in 4 minutes. She listened without interrupting. Then she asked him 3 specific questions about the injury profile, the existing documentation, and his proposed initial assessment structure. This is exactly the kind of case that separates clinicians from technicians, she said. Don't treat it as a favor you're doing her. Treat it as your first real patient, because that's what it is. Understood, I'll have the practicum paperwork ready by tomorrow afternoon. And Cooper, I'm going to want weekly reports. Detailed ones? Yes, ma'am. He drove the rest of the way home thinking about baselines. About what the first assessment might show. About the toes of his right foot, and whether, if someone who knew what they were looking for and had the patience to wait, something might move. Sandra's office, 47th floor 1 week later. 6:07 a.m. The paperwork had taken 4 days. Dr. Johnson processed the supervised practicum designation with the focused speed of someone who understood why the timing mattered. She reviewed his proposed baseline assessment protocol, recommended 2 modifications to the sensory testing sequence, and signed the documentation. The UGA Physical Therapy Department co-sketcher was in place by Wednesday afternoon. Dr. Raymond Harris was harder. He was a 61-year-old neurosurgeon with a reputation that had been earned over 30 years of technically demanding work. He was precise, careful, and accustomed to being the person in the room who understood the most about the relevant subject matter. He took Darnell's call, listened to the full explanation, and was quiet for long enough that Darnell checked the line twice. "You understand the weight of what you're asking me to sanction," Harris said finally. "Supervised clinical practicum, fully documented. Nothing outside evidence-based protocols already established in the literature. I'm asking you to review the baseline assessment once it's complete, and confirm that the proposed treatment protocol creates no risk of harm. That's the scope of what I'm asking. I understand the scope you're describing. I'm asking whether you understand what happens to her expectations if this doesn't produce results, Dr. Harris. The informed consent document she'll sign states clearly that there are no guaranteed outcomes. I won't be telling her she'll walk. I'll be telling her that the data suggests more potential than her current program is targeting, and that we're going to find out together whether that potential is real." Another pause. "Send me your protocols before each phase change. Anything I flag stops until I clear it." "Agreed. And one more thing, sir. If you are wrong about the ceiling, if you raise her expectations and the ceiling turns out to be where I believe it is, that cost is on you. You carry that. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir." Completely. He arrived at the 47th floor at 6:07 a.m. with a portable assessment table, a precisely organized equipment bag, and a single-page document summarizing what the first session would and would not involve. Sandra was already there, already dressed dark trousers, a fitted navy top, hair back. She had the quality of someone who had been awake for a while, which he suspected meant she had not slept particularly well. The ibuprofen bottle was on the desk again. He handed her the single-page summary without comment. She read it in approximately 90 seconds. "Baseline only today," she said. "Correct. No treatment. Assessment only. I need to know what we're actually working with before I propose anything." Understood. He set up the portable table with efficient movements. No ceremony, no performance of preparation. She watched him work with the specific quality of attention she gave to things she was evaluating. "You served," she said, 3 years. "Medical Corps. Why did you leave?" He set the last piece of equipment in place before answering. "My daughter needed a father who came home every night." Sandra said nothing in response to that, but something in the set of her shoulders shifted slightly, almost imperceptibly. The rigid quality of her posture released perhaps 2 degrees. He began the assessment. He worked methodically through the baseline protocol, explaining each component before performing it. "I'm going to map sensation across a grid pattern. You tell me what you feel: sharp, dull, pressure, nothing, or uncertain. There are no wrong answers. Uncertain is useful information." She nodded. He worked through the grid carefully. When he reached the lateral aspect of her left thigh, she said, "Pressure. Faint." He noted it without changing his expression. "That's not in your current clinical documentation," he said. "That specific location was never tested, I see," he continued. 3 more areas on the left side returned sensation responses that weren't in any of her existing documentation, none of them strong. All of them present and measurable and real. He completed the motor assessment and wrote his notes with the precision he had developed over 4 years of training: which foot, which movement, latency, degree, quality of response. Everything exactly as it needed to be documented. Then he pulled his chair to face her directly. "One more thing. Not a treatment, a test. Go ahead, close your eyes." 3 slow breaths. Then put your full attention on your right foot. Don't try to move it. Don't try to feel it. Just locate it, be aware of where it is in the room. She gave him a look that was not quite skepticism but was adjacent to it. Proprioception, he said. The brain's spatial awareness of where the body is. It's among the first functions disrupted by spinal injury and among the first that responds to targeted rehabilitation. I want to see if there's a signal. She closed her eyes. He watched her face, the focused stillness of it. Her breathing slowed deliberately. She was someone who knew how to concentrate completely. Now, he said quietly, see if you can move your right foot. Toes, heel, any movement at all. The room was quiet. 10 seconds. 15, 20. At second 23, the toes of her right foot moved small, perhaps 4 degrees of flexion. The kind of movement that could be dismissed as involuntary, a reflex, a twitch, the body doing something below the level of intention. It was not that. Darnell had been trained to recognize the difference, and the difference was specific. A reflex had no latency. It happened at the speed of a spinal reflex arc, below conscious processing. What he had just observed had a half-second latency between his instruction and the movement. That half-second was the brain processing a voluntary request and transmitting the signal down a pathway that was damaged but not gone. Open your eyes, he said. She opened them. Did you feel that? She asked. I saw it. Did you feel it? A pause. Her face was very controlled. Something, she said. I can't be certain what. That's fine. Certainty isn't the goal today. He wrote it down. Exact detail. Which foot, which movement group, latency estimate, degree of motion, quality characterization. Date, time, session number. What does it mean? She asked. He looked up from his notes. It means the pathway is present, he said. Damaged, but present. There is something here to work with. She looked at him, and in the early morning quiet of the 47th floor, in the careful controlled space behind Sandra Anderson's eyes, something shifted. Not hope, not yet, not fully. She had been managing herself too carefully for too long to let something in that fast. But the place where hope had been the place that had been dark and locked and professionally accepted. As dark and locked received something. A signal. Faint, like pressure on the outside of a door. Same time tomorrow? He asked, repacking his equipment. Yes, she said. He moved toward the door. Mr. Cooper, he turned. She was watching him with the expression of someone who has just made a decision they intend to keep. Don't make me regret trusting you. I won't. He left. In the elevator, he allowed himself one quiet exhale. One small movement of 4 degrees. He had worked with patients who had rebuilt from less. The work was beginning. Anderson Industries' 47th floor, morning sessions. Weeks 2 through 11. 3 months is not a long time. In business, 3 months is a quarter. A reporting cycle. Numbers that either justify your strategy or expose it. In the human body, 3 months is something else entirely. 3 months is the brain sending the same signal down the same damaged pathway, again and again, with enough consistency that the pathway begins to respond. It is muscles that went quiet, being asked carefully, incrementally, with precise calibration to remember a language they once spoke fluently. It is the nervous system, which does not care about prognosis documents or surgical consensus, doing what nervous systems do when given the right conditions. Finding a way, 3 months can change what's possible. Darnell arrived at Sandra Anderson's office every morning at 6 o'clock. Without exception. He brought the same equipment bag, organized the same way each time. He brought the same documentation forms. He brought the same complete, undivided attention that he gave every patient he had ever worked with, which so far in his clinical life numbered 11, but which he treated as if each one were the only measure of whether he was doing the work correctly. He did not bring false hope. He had promised her he wouldn't, and he was someone who kept promises because keeping them was load-bearing in his understanding of how to live. What he brought instead was a protocol, evidence-based, built on the specific neurology of incomplete T12 injuries and Sandra's specific baseline data, not on population averages. Reviewed and co-signed by Dr. Patricia Johnson before each new phase, updated to Dr. Raymond Harris every 2 weeks, who read the summaries with the skeptical precision of a scientist. Looking for errors and, finding fewer than he expected, responded with increasingly brief clinical acknowledgments that contained no praise and no objection. Some mornings he also brought coffee. Not every morning, perhaps 3 times a week. He picked up 2 cups from the cart in the lobby on his way through, set one on her desk without comment, and began setting up his equipment. She never thanked him and he never expected her to, but she always drank it before they started, and he noticed, and that was enough small things. He had learned the weight of small things from 5 years of raising a daughter alone, and 3 years of working with people whose bodies were trying to communicate something important. Small things were how people showed what they actually felt before they found words for it, or before they decided they trusted you enough to use words. Progress came in the same incremental, measurable way that Darnell had told her it would, which was to say, not dramatically, and not in the straight upward line that people who hadn't done this work tended to imagine. By the end of week 4, Sandra could sustain controlled, voluntary movement in both legs for 15-second intervals. Not strong, not stable enough for weight bearing, but consistent, repeatable, clearly driven by intention rather than reflex. She could reproduce the movement on command. That was the distinction that mattered. By the end of week 6, sensory mapping showed restoration to 71% of the areas that had returned no response in her original post-surgical evaluation. 71% where the chart had said nothing. She had read that figure on the documentation he showed her, and not said anything for almost a full minute. By the end of week 10, she could stand at the parallel bars with both hands on the rails for 45 seconds. The first time she held 40 seconds, Darnell watched the timer and said nothing. When she let go and sat back, there was a pause, then, again, no celebration, no acknowledgement that 40 seconds was remarkable given where she had started. Just, again, that was Sandra Anderson. She processed results by repeating them until they became baseline, and then she asked what came next. Darnell was entirely comfortable with this approach. He documented everything with the rigor of someone who understood that the documentation would matter beyond this room. Every session had a written record. Every measurement was dated and time-stamped. Every protocol modification had a written rationale. He sent weekly summaries to Dr. Johnson, who responded with comments that ranged from brief technical notes to, occasionally, a single line that read something like, "This is good work, Cooper." High praise from her, and he knew it. Word had started moving through the building. Buildings carry information the way water moves, without direction, without announcement, finding every low point and collecting there. The executive floor staff knew. A few people in Sandra's outer office knew. The night security desk knew because Darnell had to be signed in before the cleaning crew's official start time, and security desks noticed everything. He had heard, secondhand, that 2 members of the facilities management team had discussed it in the parking garage. People had opinions. He had anticipated this. He had also anticipated his own response to it, which was to continue showing up at 6 a.m. with his equipment bag and do the work. What he had not anticipated, not fully, not with the precision that he applied to clinical variables, was that Sandra Anderson didn't particularly care what the building thought. She cared about data. The data was moving in the right direction. On a Thursday morning in the 11th week, Brenda Wright was at her desk in the outer office when Darnell arrived at 6. She was already working. She was usually working before Sandra arrived, which said something about the quality of the person Sandra had hired. "She's already in," Brenda said. She paused a beat. She received a call early this morning. Morrison Capital. Darnell absorbed that. Sandra had mentioned Morrison Capital once briefly, the way you mention a variable you're tracking but not yet worried about. How long has she been in? Since 4:30 he went in. Sandra was not at her desk. She was at the window on the east wall, both hands on the window ledge, standing. Using the ledge for support, yes, but standing. Looking out at the city going pale with early light. It was the first time he had arrived to find her on her feet. He didn't say anything about it. He set his bag down and began his setup at the regular pace. Morrison Capital made a formal offer, she said. She didn't turn from the window. They're framing it as an acquisition opportunity. The premium is 22% over current market value, hostile. Not officially. Not yet. It will be if I decline. He pulled out the documentation forms. Are you going to decline? Now she turned from the window. She looked tired in a way that was different from the physical exhaustion he had been watching for 3 months. This was strategic tiredness, the kind that came from seeing several moves ahead and understanding the cost of each of them. The timing is not coincidental, she said. He understood what she meant. The press had been running pieces for 2 weeks. Not aggressive pieces, careful ones, the kind that asked questions instead of making claims. Whether a CEO managing a significant disability could maintain the focus the role required. Whether a relationship between an executive and a building services employee created structural complications for the organization. The kind of coverage that didn't say anything libelous but made institutional investors feel uncertain. Morrison Capital was a company that knew how to read uncertainty. They believe the coverage has created an opening, he said. They believe I'm distracted. He looked at her directly. Are you? She met his eyes. No. He believed her. Then let's work, he said. She came away from the window, settled into the session position, and they began. Piedmont Park, Atlanta, a Saturday afternoon in late October. It had been Sandra's suggestion. He had not seen it coming. She raised it at the end of a session on a Wednesday, in the careful tone she used when she had been considering something for a while, and had finally decided to say it. I'd like to meet your daughter. He looked up from his documentation. Why? Because you mention her frequently. And because, a pause that was uncharacteristic of her. If what's happening between us is going somewhere, then I should know whether I can genuinely connect with the person who is most important to you. I'd rather know that early. He took a moment before responding. She's 5. She asks approximately 1,000 questions per encounter, and she holds strong opinions on a range of subjects, including pasta shapes, the correct color for rain boots, and whether dogs understand English. I run a company with 412 employees. None of them are 5. Sandra almost smiled. That's an accurate distinction. They arranged it for the following Saturday. Piedmont Park. Mid-afternoon, when the October air had finally broken the Atlanta heat and left something clean and clear in its place. Darnell pushed Sandra's wheelchair along the main paved path. She had the walker now had been using it for short indoor distances, but she had declined it for today. She had said she wanted to meet Zoe without the effort of managing the walker's weight. She wanted her attention free. He had understood that completely. Zoe was already at the park with Miss Claudette, the retired nurse from their building who had, without anyone formally establishing this arrangement, become the person Darnell called when he needed someone he trusted completely to be with his daughter. Miss Claudette had her own opinions about most things and communicated them directly, which meant she and Zoe got along extremely well. Zoe saw them from 40 feet away. She was wearing her yellow dress, the one she called her sunshine dress. Her hair was in 2 puffs with yellow bands. She was holding a stick that she had apparently been using for some purpose she considered important, and she dropped it immediately when she saw her father and began walking toward them with the purposeful stride of someone who has business to conduct. She stopped in front of the wheelchair and looked at Sandra with direct, uncomplicated assessment. Are you Miss Sandra? I am, Sandra said. Daddy says you're working really hard to get better. That's true. Does it hurt? A pause that was brief and honest. Sometimes, Sandra said. Daddy says hurting means your body is working on something. Like when you fall down and your knee stings. That's your body fixing the place where you got hurt. Your father is right about that. He's right about a lot of things, Zoe said in the tone of someone reporting an established fact. Except he puts too much spinach in the scrambled eggs. Nobody wants that. Sandra looked at Darnell. Darnell found something on the horizon that required his attention. Can I sit next to you? Zoe asked. Of course. Zoe climbed onto the park bench beside the wheelchair with the complete unself-consciousness of a child who had not yet learned to calibrate her behavior for unfamiliar adults. She simply sat down, arranged herself, and began talking. She talked about her kindergarten teacher, Miss Patricia, who was very kind but sang the words to the cleanup song in the wrong order, which Zoe found troubling. She talked about her best friend Amara, who was learning cartwheels and was going to teach Zoe, and this was going to happen very soon. She talked about a cat she wanted to have, named Biscuit, who didn't exist yet but was going to live in her bedroom when her father said yes, which was going to happen eventually because she was patient. Sandra listened, not with the polite attention of an adult enduring a child's monologue. With the quality of attention she gave to board presentations, total, sequential, retaining the details. When Zoe finished one topic and began another, Sandra tracked the transition. When Zoe referenced something she had said 3 topics ago, Sandra's face showed she had kept it. Darnell stood back a few feet and watched. He had thought carefully about this meeting, the way he thought carefully about things that mattered. He had considered the possibility that it would be awkward, that Sandra's relationship with children was simply undeveloped through years of professional focus, and that Zoe would sense the gap and become quieter than usual, and that the afternoon would be fine but not what it needed to be. He had also considered the other possibility. Zoe had gone quiet, not the quiet of discomfort. The quiet of someone who is looking at a person very carefully, the way 5-year-olds did when they were making up their minds about something important. "You smell nice," she said to Sandra. "Thank you. Are you going to come back to the park again?" Sandra glanced at Darnell quickly. He kept his expression neutral. "I'd like to," Sandra said. "Good." Zoe nodded with the satisfaction of someone who has confirmed something they expected. "Because I like you. And Daddy needs more people." "More people? He has me and Miss Claudette. That's 2. 2 is not enough people for a whole family." Darnell cleared his throat. Zoe looked at him with the expression she used when she was stating obvious facts and couldn't understand why anyone would find them uncomfortable. "It's true, Daddy. I know it's true. Then why do you have that face?" Sandra laughed. Not a managed laugh, not a polite social laugh. A real one, short, sudden, catching her off guard the way real laughter does. It changed her face completely. The careful control she maintained so consistently simply wasn't there for a moment. Something underneath it was. Instead, Darnell looked at her. He had heard her voice in almost every register over 3 months of 6 a.m. sessions. He had heard her tired, focused, frustrated, determined, in pain she wasn't acknowledging, and in the particular concentrated quiet of someone attempting to move a part of their body that had been silent for months. He had not heard that laugh. He looked away before she noticed him noticing. By the end of the afternoon, Zoe was on Sandra's lap, demonstrating the correct technique for braiding doll hair and explaining the social structure of her kindergarten class with the analytical thoroughness of someone presenting a complex system to a new colleague. Sandra was paying the kind of attention that made Zoe keep talking, the full, unperformed attention of someone who was genuinely finding this interesting. When they were preparing to leave, Zoe tugged on Darnell's sleeve. "Daddy, yeah, baby, is Miss Sandra going to be my new mommy?" The park continued around them. Someone's dog barked twice somewhere behind the trees. The music from a speaker across the grass drifted over and then away. Darnell and Sandra looked at each other across the small space above Zoe's head. "Sweetheart," Darnell began. "That's not quite. I'm just asking," Zoe said with the reasonableness of someone who sees no complexity in the question whatsoever. "Because I think she should be." She listened to everything I said and she didn't check her phone one single time. Sandra pressed her lips together. Darnell looked at the middle distance briefly. "These things take time to figure out," he said. "Okay," Zoe said, accepting this with equanimity. "But I'm almost 6, so not too much time." Later, after Miss Claudette had taken Zoe home and Darnell was driving Sandra back to her building, they rode in silence for the first several minutes. The city moved past the windows in its Saturday afternoon configuration, easier than weekdays. More people walking, the particular unhurried quality of a city that has given itself permission to slow down for one day. "She's remarkable," Sandra said. "She is. She has your focus. The way she concentrates, she has her mother's certainty," he said. Denise always knew exactly what she thought. No navigation, no hedging. Just the thing she believed. "Tell me about her." He drove for half a block before answering. Letting the question settle into its actual shape, she was the most genuinely optimistic person I've known. Not in a way that ignored hard things. She saw the hard things clearly. She just believed, down at the level where belief lives before you can argue with it, that the world was basically good and people were basically good, and that if you gave them room to be good, most of them would be. And you don't share that belief. "I work toward it," he said. "I'm less automatic about it than she was. She came to it naturally. I come to it as a decision." Sandra was quiet for a moment. "She would have respected what you're doing," she said, pushing back against the consensus. "Doing the work when the outcome wasn't certain. She would have found it very funny that I'm doing it in a 47-floor office building at 6 in the morning. She sounds like she had a good sense of humor. The best." He paused. "She also would have told you directly that you work too hard and that you should eat a real breakfast. She would have been right on both counts." They drove another block without speaking. The comfortable kind of silence, the kind that doesn't require filling. I never thought about having a family, Sandra said. She said it without apology, without explanation, just a statement of the way things had been. The company was the project. The company was what I was building. For a long time it was the only thing I thought about building. And now? She looked at the city moving past her window. Now I spent an afternoon in a park on a Saturday, and I'm sitting in a car at 4:30, and I can't remember the last time I did either of those things. Just existed somewhere, in the middle of the day. Not producing anything, was it difficult? She thought about it honestly. No, she said. It wasn't. Anderson Industries Conference Room A and Sandra's office. 2 weeks later the article ran on a Tuesday morning. Darnell saw it while making Zoe's breakfast. A business news site he checked periodically. The headline was unambiguous in its implication if careful in its language. Anderson Industries stock dips as CEO recovery program, draws board scrutiny. He read it in full while Zoe ate her oatmeal. The piece was constructed with the precision of journalism, designed to raise questions without technically making claims. It described the supervised clinical arrangement in accurate technical terms, and then, in the same paragraph, noted that no formal review by Anderson Industries Medical Advisory Board had been conducted. It quoted two unnamed sources, one described as a senior industry analyst, one as a person familiar with the company's governance structure, who expressed concern about the optics of the CEO's personal and professional relationship with a building services employee. The implication was legible. Sandra Anderson's judgment was compromised. Her decisions could not be fully trusted. Darnell put his phone down, finished making Zoe's lunch, got her to school, arrived at the 47th floor at 6. Sandra had the same article open on her laptop. She closed it when he came in, with the controlled motion of someone setting aside something they have already finished processing. I saw it, he said. Good morning. How is the board responding? She sat back in her chair and considered the question with the precision she gave to complex inputs. Lorraine Mitchell called at 7:15 last night. She wants a private meeting this week. Who is she? Senior board member. 12 years. Her opinion shapes the room when she speaks, the others recalibrate. He set up his equipment. What does she want from the meeting? She wants to discuss whether my personal circumstances are creating liability for the company. Sandra paused. She lost her husband 3 years ago. He was ill for 2 years before that. Over the years, in the margins of conversations about other things, I've gathered that the illness involved a treatment decision she still carries. Something about following hope that turned out not to be grounded. She said this carefully. The way she said things she had thought about from multiple angles. I don't believe her concern is malicious. I believe she's seen something go wrong in a way that stays with you, and she's looking at my situation through that experience. What are you going to do? My job, she said. The same thing I always do. She moved to the session position. Let's work. 2 days later, Lorraine Mitchell sat across from Sandra in the corner office for 40 minutes. Sandra told Darnell about it that evening. In the straightforward way, she reported things she was still organizing internally. Lorraine had spoken for the first 10 minutes. She had said, with genuine care and the authority of someone who had been watching this company for 12 years, that the press coverage was affecting institutional investor confidence, that the supervised clinical arrangement, however well-intentioned, created the appearance of preferential treatment and blurred professional boundaries in ways that a board had to take seriously. That Sandra, who was managing a significant physical limitation and had introduced a personal relationship with a subordinate employee, was operating under conditions that reasonable people on the board found concerning. She had not been unkind. She had been thorough. Sandra had let her finish completely. Then she had opened her desk drawer and placed a folder on the table between them. Inside, the full clinical protocol documentation from the first session forward, the supervised practicum certification from UGA, with Dr. Patricia Johnson's credentials and contact information, Dr. Johnson's co-signature on every phase of the protocol, Dr. Raymond Harris's bi-weekly review records, including 2 instances where Harris had flagged a proposed modification and Darnell had revised the protocol in response. The informed consent document, 14 weeks of session records, objective measurements, dated and time-stamped, with Darnell's clinical notes written in the precise, dispassionate language of someone trained to document for peer review. "Read it," Sandra said. Lorraine read it. She was thorough in the same way she was in everything systematically, without skimming, noting things that deserved noting. When she finished, she closed the folder and sat with it for a moment. "This exceeds the documentation standards of most accredited outpatient clinics," she said. "He runs it as a research-grade clinical study, because that's what his training produces." "The documentation addresses the clinical dimension," Lorraine said carefully. "It doesn't address the personal dimension." "The personal dimension is not a board matter," Sandra said. "But I'll address it anyway, because I think you deserve a direct answer." She held Lorraine's gaze. "The man who gave you false hope didn't document a single session. He had no academic credentials you could verify. He had no supervisor reviewing his work. He told your husband what he wanted to hear, and there was nothing structural in place to challenge that." Lorraine was very still. "Darnell Cooper told me in our second real conversation that there were no guarantees. He gave me a consent form that listed the risks. He built in oversight at 2 levels precisely, so that he could not tell me only what I wanted to hear. He has been wrong about 1 protocol modification in 14 weeks, caught it himself in the data, revised it, and documented the revision." Sandra did not raise her voice. "Did not accelerate. I understand what you're protecting me from, Lorraine. I'm telling you, it's not the same situation. The structure he built is the opposite of the situation you're afraid of." Lorraine was quiet for a long time. She didn't agree. Not that day. But she listened in the way of someone genuinely reconsidering, and that was different from the way she had listened when she walked in. "I'll need to review the full documentation independently," she said. "Take it with you," Sandra said. "All of it." The Morrison Capital offer formalized the following week. Full acquisition proposal, submitted through legal channels. 22% premium over market value. The position paper included a phrase that Sandra had underlined in red and shown to no one except Brenda: the opportunity to provide stability and continuity during a period of leadership transition. Sandra called an emergency board meeting for the following Thursday at 9 a.m. Darnell's apartment, East Atlanta. A Wednesday evening, Darnell found out on a Wednesday afternoon. He was at UGA for a thesis revision meeting with Dr. Johnson, working through the methodology section. She had questions about his sampling rationale, and they had been working through the answers for 40 minutes. When she set down her pen and said, with the directness he had always appreciated in her, that there was something else they needed to discuss, she explained it carefully. The supervised practicum designation was legitimate, and the documentation was, as she had told the department chair, among the most rigorous she had reviewed in 15 years. But practicum hours counted toward licensure only when they were accrued at a certified clinical site, a site that met specific facility and supervision standards defined by the Georgia State Board of Physical Therapy. Coltower's 47th floor office was not a certified clinical site. The 63 hours he had documented with Sandra were valid for his research record. They counted toward his thesis data. They contributed to his academic standing. They did not count toward the 200 hours required for his licensure application. He needed 70 more certified hours. That meant 1 additional clinical semester beyond his scheduled completion date. He thanked Dr. Johnson, walked out of her office, took the stairs instead of the elevator because he needed the extra 90 seconds. He sat in his car in the parking structure for 11 minutes. He did the math 3 times. His financial aid package covered the standard 4-year program timeline. An additional semester fell outside that coverage. He had savings. 2 years of careful accounting on a night shift income had built a buffer. But he had also been making small, consistent deposits into a separate account. Since Zoe was 3 months old, money he thought of as her future, her options, the thing that meant she would have choices he hadn't had. He could cover the additional semester if he used the car fund. The Civic had 114,000 miles on it and ran well. It could run another year, maybe longer. He called Miss Claudette, asked if she could take Zoe for the evening. She agreed without questions, which was one of the many things he valued about Miss Claudette. He drove home, sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad, and worked through the numbers with the same methodical attention he brought to clinical calculations, because the numbers deserved the same respect. He was in the middle of the third pass through the figures when the front door opened. Miss Claudette had a church commitment on Wednesday evenings that he had forgotten about. She had dropped Zoe home early. Zoe came in, dropped her backpack by the door with the practiced accuracy of someone who had done this thousands of times, climbed into the chair across from him at the kitchen table, looked at the legal pad covered in numbers. "What are you doing?" "Working through something." "Is it hard?" "A little," she nodded with the gravity of someone who understood that hard things existed and respected them. She sat quietly for a moment, which was unusual for Zoe and which meant she was paying close attention, Daddy. "Are you going to sell the car?" He looked at her. "What makes you ask that?" "I heard you tell Miss Claudette on the phone that you were thinking about it." He exhaled slowly. He had made that call while Zoe was supposedly watching her show. He had apparently underestimated her attention radius. "I might. For a little while. While I figure some things out." "Is it because of school?" "Yes." She absorbed this, looked at the legal pad, looked at him. "I could tell Miss Sandra," she said. "She has a lot of money." "No, baby, but no, that's not how we handle things." Zoe studied him with the expression she deployed when she was deciding whether to accept something or file it for future discussion. "Okay," she said finally. "But I'm going to think about it, Zoe." "Thinking doesn't cost anything, Daddy." He could not find an argument against this. He found out 3 days later that Zoe had, in fact, gone well beyond thinking. She had told Sandra, not as a calculated move, in the way 5-year-olds communicated things, because it was present in her mind, and Sandra had asked at the end of their next park visit how Daddy was doing, and the honest answer to that question included the information that Daddy was doing math at the kitchen table and possibly selling the car. Sandra called Darnell that evening. "I need to tell you something," she said, "and I need you to hear the full explanation before you respond." He sat down. She explained that Anderson Industries had been reviewing a proposal for nearly 2 years to establish a certified occupational health and wellness satellite facility within the building. Multiple proposals had been submitted. None had moved forward due to competing priorities and unclear ROI projections. She had reviewed the most recent proposal that afternoon. The business case was strong. The 46th floor had underutilized space that had been identified for potential conversion. The facility, once certified by the Georgia State Board of Physical Therapy, would provide services to building employees and generate revenue through third-party clinical contracts. She was approving the proposal and moving it forward. The space could be certified and operational within 6 weeks. "That creates a certified clinical site," she said. "Your hours count. You finish on schedule." He was quiet for a long moment. "This is charity," he said. "This is a business decision with a 2-year proposal history that I am choosing to prioritize now. I am not creating this facility for you. I am creating it because it makes business sense, and I have the authority and the current motivation to stop delaying it." "Sandra, Darnell," her voice was firm and clear. "There is a material difference between me writing you a check and me removing a structural obstacle that exists in my organization and that I have the ability to remove. One is charity. The other is a decision I am making with my own authority about my own company." He sat with that. "If we don't work out, the facility exists independent of us. It will serve other practitioners and other patients, regardless of what happens between you and me. It is not contingent on our relationship." He turned it over carefully, looked at it from multiple angles. "I need to know," he said, "that you're not doing this because you feel obligated. Because of what we have, I'm doing this because it's the right business decision and because I want to." Those two things are both true and neither one cancels the other out. Another pause. "Okay," he said. "Okay." "And Sandra, you're welcome," she said. "Don't make it awkward." He heard something in the silence that followed, that she wasn't putting into words, something that had been building across 14 weeks of 6 a.m. sessions and careful documentation and honest conversations, and one Saturday afternoon in a park. Something that both of them were moving toward with the careful pace of people who had learned to be precise about what they committed to. "Good night," he said. "Good night, Darnell." Anderson Industries Conference Room A, Thursday morning, and the 46th floor. That evening the board meeting was called for 9 a.m. Darnell had a seminar at 8 and practicum preparation at 10. He was across the city when the meeting started. He sat in the seminar and paid attention to the material, and did not check his phone. because checking his phone would not change what was happening in that room. And he had learned, from the army and from 5 years of being someone's only parent, to put his attention where it could actually do something. Brenda Wright texted him at 9:49, 2 words. She's good. He heard the full account that evening. Sandra and Darnell were sitting in the half-finished space on the 46th floor, the room that would become the clinical site. Bare walls still, storage boxes stacked in one corner, but the space was clear enough for 2 chairs, and the takeout he had brought from the place. 2 blocks from his apartment that Zoe had elevated to official family restaurant status through the force of her opinion. Sandra told it the way she told things sequentially, precisely, without emotional inflation. She had entered the boardroom at 9 o'clock in her wheelchair. 8 board members at the table, the Morrison Capital acquisition proposal in front of each of them. She had let everyone settle, and then she had begun. She presented the Q3 figures first. Revenue up 14% over the prior year. Client retention at 91%, better than the previous year, better than industry average. The Pacific Northwest Enterprise contract, signed the previous week and not yet public, which added $23 million in confirmed annual recurring revenue. She presented the 5-year expansion plan. 3 new markets with detailed entry strategies, conservative projections, and 2 optimistic scenarios with explicitly stated assumptions. She presented the talent metrics. 15 senior hires in the past 18 months, internal promotion rate above industry benchmark, voluntary turnover at its lowest in 5 years. She spoke for 38 minutes. Without notes, then she stopped and let the room be quiet. Morrison Capital has timed this offer based on a belief that Anderson Industries is vulnerable. Because I am vulnerable, she said. I want to address that directly. No one moved. I have an incomplete T12 spinal injury. I have been in this wheelchair for 6 months. I work with a clinical practitioner who has produced measurable progress toward recovery under full medical supervision and documentation. That clinical relationship has become personal as well. She looked at the table. I'm not telling you this because it's board business. It isn't. I'm telling you because allowing Morrison to define the narrative about my situation is not something I'm willing to do. I define my narrative. Bernard Cole, the longest-serving board member, 64 years old, on the board since Sandra's father ran the company, leaned forward. The numbers are strong. Sandra? Yes. The question at this table is whether the circumstances affecting your personal life are also affecting your leadership. My attention is not divided, she said. It has expanded. I am a better CEO this quarter than I was a year ago. Not despite what I've been through. Because of it, I have a clearer understanding than I have ever had of what it costs to build something, and I have more conviction, not less, about what this company is for and why it matters. Lorraine Mitchell had been silent through the entire presentation. She spoke now. I reviewed the complete clinical documentation independently, she said. Her voice was measured. The protocol is rigorous. The oversight structure is sound. The documented progress is real. A pause. I have no objection to the clinical arrangement, and for the record I have observed Sandra Anderson lead this company through 2 difficult periods in 12 years. She has never once allowed a personal circumstance to compromise a professional decision. I see no evidence that standard has changed. The vote was called 6-1 to reject the Morrison Capital acquisition proposal. The single dissenting vote came from a board member who had joined the board 14 months ago, with a prior professional relationship to Morrison Capital that Sandra's legal team had been quietly reviewing for the past week. That review was nearly complete. After the vote, the room cleared. Lorraine stayed. Thank you, Sandra said when they were alone. Lorraine gathered her papers deliberately. The way she did everything. I read the documentation carefully, she said. What you said about his approach, the built-in uncertainty, the oversight structure, the documentation, you were right. It is structurally different from what I was afraid of. I know. I'm still cautious by nature, Lorraine said. But I'm cautious about the right things. That's all I've ever asked of you. Lorraine paused at the door. She looked at Sandra with the expression of someone who has revised a long-held position and is acknowledging the revision without drama. He'd better be worth it, she said. He is, Sandra said. Darnell listened to all of this in the half-built room on the 46th floor, the takeout containers between them. the city visible through the window going into its evening configuration. "You handled it exactly right," he said. "I handled it the only way I know how. That's what I said." She looked at him. In 3 months, he had watched her be precise and demanding, and occasionally brilliant, and once or twice, only once or twice, genuinely afraid, though she would not have used that word. He had watched her rebuild something real from the inside out, one session at a time, with the consistency of someone who had decided the work mattered and then simply did the work. "Darnell," she said. "Yeah, I want to say something and I need you to let me finish it." "Okay." She looked at the window for a moment, then at him. "I don't have a framework for this," she said. "I've run negotiations with billion-dollar stakes. I've managed board dynamics and investor pressure, and 2 acquisitions and 1 near hostile takeover. I understand how those systems work." She stopped, started again. "I have never had someone in my life who made me feel like the thing I was doing was mine. Not managed, not assessed, not measured against some external standard. Mine. You tell me when I've reached the limit of what the data supports, and you tell me when I've exceeded what you thought I could do, and both times you say it like it's just true. Like I'm just a person, doing a thing." He was quiet. "I've been a CEO for 6 years," she said. "I don't remember the last time someone treated me like I was just a person doing a thing." "You are," he said. "That's all you are in that room at 6 in the morning. Someone doing the work, I know. But you're the reason I know that." He looked at her. In the bare room, in the lamplight from the single fixture they had turned on, with the city visible through the uncurtained window, Sandra Anderson looked at him without the management layer, without the precision and the control and the careful professional distance she maintained everywhere else. Just herself. "I care about you," she said. "Considerably more than I know how to be neutral about." He was quiet for a moment. "Sandra, you don't have to. I care about you too." He said it simply. Because it was simple. "I've been careful about it because I have a daughter whose life I have to be thoughtful about, and because the clinical relationship carries obligations I don't take lightly. But I would not be telling the truth if I said this has been purely professional for several weeks." She exhaled, not dramatically, just the breath of someone who has been carrying something and has set it down. "So what do we do?" she asked. "We keep doing the work, because the work is real and it doesn't stop. And we let the rest develop at the pace it needs to develop. You're methodical about everything. It's how I'm built. It's also one of the things She stopped. "One of the things you what?" She looked at him with the expression of someone who has decided to say a true thing. "One of the things I trust about you," she said. "You don't move faster than the data supports. With patience or with anything else." "No," he agreed. "I don't." Outside, Atlanta settled into its nighttime rhythms. The big buildings across the skyline lit their upper floors against the dark. Traffic thinned on the streets below. The city became a quieter, smaller version of its daytime self. Inside, 2 people sat in a room that was in the process of becoming something not finished, not declared, but moving toward a shape that both of them could see, one careful step at a time. That was the only way. Darnell Cooper knew how to build anything that lasted. Anderson Industries' 46th floor clinical site, month 9. The room had changed completely. 6 weeks after Sandra approved the build-out, the 46th floor space bore no resemblance to the bare room where they had eaten takeout and said things that needed to be said. The storage boxes were gone. The walls were painted a clean, neutral white that caught morning light well. 2 parallel bars were anchored properly into a reinforced floor section. Not portable equipment, permanent installation. A padded treatment table along the east wall. A documentation station with a proper chair and adequate lighting. A small equipment cabinet with organized shelving. A window running nearly the full length of the south wall that let the morning light in at an angle that made the room feel. From the first day they used it, like a place where things were possible. Brenda Wright had overseen the build-out personally. She had coordinated with the building operations team, the Georgia State Board of Physical Therapy Certification Inspector, and the contractor with the same precise efficiency she applied to every task Sandra gave her. When Darnell had thanked her, she had said, without looking up from her work, "I've been with Sandra Anderson for 7 years. I know what matters to her. This matters." And that was the end of the conversation. The facility received its certification on a Thursday. Darnell had driven to the building that evening after his shift and stood in the empty room for a few minutes. He had looked at the parallel bars, the treatment table, the documentation station with its clean surface. He had thought about a hospital hallway at 2 in the morning, a man getting up for the third time from a wheelchair. Then he had gone home and made Zoe's lunch for the next day and gone to bed. Month 9 arrived the way all months did, not as a marker, just as a continuation of the daily work that had been accumulating since October. Dr. Raymond Harris requested the reassessment himself. This was notable. In 9 months of bi-weekly reports and protocol reviews, Harris had been the skeptic, not hostile, not obstructive, but consistently the person who read Darnell's data, looking for the error rather than the progress. His responses had been brief, clinical, and carefully devoid of encouragement. He reviewed what was required of him and communicated his approvals with the minimum language necessary. The fact that he requested the full reassessment, rather than waiting for the one Darnell had scheduled, meant something. He arrived on a Tuesday at 8 a.m., 61 years old, precise in his movements, the unhurried confidence of someone who had been excellent at his work for 30 years and knew it without needing to perform it. He carried his own assessment equipment in a worn leather bag that looked like it had been with him since residency. Sandra was already in the room when he arrived. She was standing at the parallel bars, not holding them, standing beside them, the way she had started doing in the mornings, while she waited for Darnell to finish his setup. Harris registered this without comment. He set his bag down, greeted them both with the professional brevity of a man who found social preamble inefficient, and began. Darnell stood at the documentation station and recorded. Harris worked through the assessment with the thoroughness of someone who was going to be responsible for whatever conclusions he reached. He moved through the sensory mapping grid methodically, noting responses, checking them against the baseline documentation that Darnell had provided in advance. He ran the motor testing sequence. He observed Sandra perform 6 different movement tasks at his direction, watching with the focused attention of a clinician looking at something he is trying to fully understand. He worked for 43 minutes. Then he sat at the small desk in the corner and spent several minutes reviewing his notes against Darnell's baseline records from month 1. The room held its quiet. Harris looked up. Sensory recovery is at 76% of the original deficit areas, he said. 78, Darnell said. The lateral thoracic segments at T11 responded in the past 2 weeks. I have the documentation. Harris looked at his notes, looked at Darnell's documentation. Cross-referenced, 78, he said. Motor control active voluntary. Below the injury level, you're showing 58% of normal function. The left hip flexor group was lagging. We modified the proprioceptive sequencing 4 weeks ago. It's been responding. I see the modification in the records. Harris was quiet. He cleaned his glasses with a deliberate motion, the particular gesture Darnell had observed in other senior physicians, of someone giving themselves a few seconds to absorb an unexpected result. My original prognosis for this injury class, in a patient with this profile, was 10 to 15% functional motor recovery over 12 months with standard rehabilitation. Yes, you're at 58%. In 9 months? Yes, Harris put his glasses back on. He looked at Darnell with the specific quality of attention that a rigorous scientist gives to a result that has exceeded every projection, not with excitement, but with the focused inquiry of someone who needs to understand the mechanism. I want your complete protocol, he said. Not the phase summaries, the full documentation. Exercise sequencing, neurological stimulation timing, proprioceptive integration architecture, patient education component, all of it. I can have it to you by Friday. I want to understand what you accounted for that I didn't. Darnell took the question seriously before answering it. You accounted for the injury, he said. I accounted for the person. Harris looked at him. Elaborate, standard rehabilitation frameworks are built from population data, what the average patient with this injury class achieves in this time frame under standard conditions. They're not built from the individual's specific neurology, their cognitive relationship with their recovery, their existing motor cortex architecture, or their capacity to understand and actively participate in the mechanisms of what they're doing. Motivation as a variable. The evidence is mixed. Motivation in isolation, yes. But Sandra wasn't just motivated. Darnell chose his words carefully. She understood, from the second week, exactly what neuroplasticity means in functional terms. She understood why visualizing a movement before attempting it was not a psychological technique but a neurological one, that the visualization and the attempt were both building the same pathway. She wasn't complying with exercises. She was a participant in her own recovery, with full comprehension of what she was doing and why. Harris sat with that. She also has an exceptional baseline motor cortex density, Darnell continued. She was an athlete through college and her 20s. Her brain had a rich library of movement patterns to rebuild from. That's not something standard prognosis tools capture. That I should have waited, Harris said. Yes. Harris looked at his notes one more time. Then he set them down. Cooper, sir. When you first contacted me about this arrangement, I told you that if you gave this woman false hope and she fell apart because of it, that responsibility was yours. I remember. I want to be precise about what I'm saying now. Harris looked at him directly. You didn't give her false hope. You gave her accurate hope, which is a different thing entirely, and considerably more difficult to do. I want you to know that I understand the difference. It was not an apology. Harris was constitutionally disinclined toward apology. But it was a precise, deliberate acknowledgement from a man who chose his words carefully, and Darnell received it as such. Thank you, Dr. Harris. Harris turned to Sandra, Miss Anderson. I'd like to try something before I leave. He asked her to stand at the parallel bars. She stood. He asked us to remove one hand from the bar. She did. He watched her balance the micro-adjustments, the core engagement, the way her weight distributed between her feet. Then, slowly and with his full attention on her, he said, both hands. She released the bar. She stood without support, both feet on the floor, her arms slightly away from her sides for balance, a natural response. Her breathing controlled and even. 1 second. 3, 5, 7 seconds. Then she reached back for the bar. Harris made a note. He wrote for almost a full minute, which from him indicated significant documentation. I'm updating your care plan, he said. Full weight-bearing ambulation training. Walker assisted initially, with the goal of progressive reduction in dependence. Sandra looked at Darnell. He kept his expression neutral. She knew him well enough now to read the thing that lived behind the neutral. He had known. He had known for at least 2 weeks that she was ready for this step. He had been waiting for Harris to arrive at the conclusion independently, through his own assessment, rather than on the basis of Darnell's reports alone, because that was how he built things. With the supports in the right places, put there by the right people, so they held. When do we start? She asked. You already have, Harris said. 7 seconds ago. University of Georgia Physical Therapy Program. A Saturday morning in spring. Darnell had not told anyone he was getting his results that week. Not Sandra, not Zoe, not Miss Claudette, not Dr. Johnson, who knew the results were coming, because she was the one processing them. But who had not been told that Darnell was treating the arrival of the news the way he treated most significant things, quietly, without advanced ceremony, in case something went wrong. He was not generally superstitious. But he had learned that some things were better not named too early. Dr. Johnson called on a Thursday afternoon. He was at the clinical site finishing his session documentation for the day, the last of his notes from a morning that had included Sandra walking the length of the parallel bars with one hand on the rail, and then, at the end, 3 steps without contact, he saw her name on his phone and set down his pen. Cooper, she said. Your final clinical evaluation scores are in and you passed well. Your scores place you in the top 4% of the cohort. He was quiet. Cooper, I'm here. There's something else. I've submitted your name for the Advanced Clinical Fellowship track, a 2-year postgraduate program, fully funded, with placement at one of 3 research-integrated rehabilitation centers in the state. I recommend 4 students per decade. You're the 4th. A pause. You don't have to decide immediately, but I wanted you to know the option exists. He thanked her, said goodbye, sat in the clinical site for a while, the room that Sandra had created because he needed a certified site, the room where he had documented 9 months of daily work, with the rigor of someone who understood that documentation was not administrative burden, but clinical integrity. The room where a woman who had been told with authority and good intentions that her body had reached its limit had stood for 7 seconds without holding on to anything. He called Sandra. Are you free Saturday morning? I can be. What is it? I want to show you something. Bring Zoe. The UGA Doctor of Physical Therapy program held its cohort graduation ceremony on Saturday mornings in the spring informal by the standards of institutional events, which meant folding chairs instead of auditorium seating, and a sheet cake from the bakery on Baxter Street that Dr. Johnson ordered every year without variation. It meant the students' families in the first several rows and the faculty standing along the wall. It meant the particular warmth of a small room full of people who had been working toward the same thing for 4 years. Darnell had not planned to make it significant. He had told Sandra he wanted to show her something at the university. He had not said what. He had told himself this was because he didn't want to build expectations and then have to manage them if something felt flat. He had not examined this reasoning too closely, because examining it closely would have required admitting that he wanted to see her face when she walked in and understood. Sandra arrived with Zoe at 9:45, 15 minutes before the ceremony began. Zoe walked into the event room, took in the paper banners along the walls, the table with name cards and the sheet cake, the faculty in their good blazers, the clusters of families holding flowers. She stopped, looked at all of it with the comprehensive assessment of someone cataloging a scene. Then she turned to Sandra. "Daddy's becoming a doctor today," she said with absolute certainty. Sandra put her hand over her mouth, just for a moment. Just long enough for Darnell, standing across the room and watching, to see it. She recovered her composure within 2 seconds, which was very fast, and which told him something about how much the moment had landed. They found seats in the 3rd row. Darnell kept his attention on the program as it moved through the cohort, the faculty remarks, the individual acknowledgements. When Dr. Johnson reached his name, she paused. Darnell Cooper came to this program with more practical clinical experience than most students finish with, she said. He came having already worked in conditions that tested everything this program tries to teach. But what he brought, that 4 years of curriculum cannot produce, what I can tell you, after 40 years of teaching, is genuinely rare, is the understanding that recovery is not a thing you do to a patient. She looked at him directly. It is a thing you do with them. It requires that you see the person, not just the injury. That you understand not only the mechanics of what the body can do, but the internal experience of someone who has been told what it can't. Darnell Cooper understands both of these things. He has produced clinical outcomes in the past year that I will reference in my teaching for the remainder of my career. In the 3rd row, Zoe had gone completely still. This happened rarely. Darnell could count on one hand the situations in which his daughter had been completely still and quiet simultaneously. Sandra had noticed it too. He could see, from the stage, that she had looked at Zoe and registered the stillness, and was now watching with the particular attention of someone who is witnessing something she wants to remember. Zoe watched her father cross the small stage, watched him receive his documentation from Dr. Johnson, watched him shake her hand and turn to face the room. Then, in the clear, carrying voice she used for things that deserved to be heard properly, "That's my daddy," not loudly, clearly. The people in the surrounding seats heard it. Several of them smiled. A woman in the 2nd row with a toddler on her lap looked over and caught Zoe's eye and nodded with the specific solidarity of a parent who recognized exactly what she was looking at. Darnell heard it from the stage. He found Zoe's face in the 3rd row. The absolute pride on it, unmanaged, entirely her own. Then he found Sandra's face beside her. Sandra was not performing a reaction. She was not constructing an appropriate expression for a public moment. She was simply looking at him directly, openly, with the quality of attention she gave to things that mattered to her, the way she had looked at the baseline data, on the morning the first pathway responded, but more than that, with something that the data couldn't account for. Like someone who had stopped being surprised by what was possible and had started, instead, to expect it. After the ceremony, while families gathered around the refreshment table, and Dr. Johnson worked her way through the room, she found Sandra standing near the window. "I've reviewed your case documentation," Dr. Johnson said. "With your permission, I'd like to submit it as an anonymized teaching case. The progression data is genuinely instructive for how we frame prognosis conversations with patients in this injury class." Sandra looked at Darnell, who had joined them. "It's your story," he said. "Your call entirely." She considered it. How many patients with incomplete T12 injuries are told there's no meaningful ceiling on their recovery? "Not enough," Dr. Johnson said. Significantly not enough. Then use it, Sandra said. In the parking lot afterward, the three of them walked to the car together. Zoe had positioned herself between the two adults and taken both their hands without comment or ceremony, simply reached up, found each hand and held on. Sandra had looked down at the small hand in hers, then looked ahead and kept walking. "Daddy," Zoe said. "Yeah, baby. Now that you're a real doctor, does that mean you're going to stop cleaning the offices?" "I'm a physical therapist, not a doctor." "Completely different. It seems the same. It really isn't. Are you going to stop cleaning the offices?" "Yes, very soon." Zoe considered this. "I liked the office," she said. "Cole Tower." "Why?" "Because that's where you met Miss Sandra." She swung their joined hands once forward and back, the satisfied arc of someone who has made a point she considers conclusive, and kept walking. Neither of the adults had a response to that. 46th floor clinical site 2 weeks after graduation, early morning. Darnell had been thinking about this session for 10 days. Not planning it in the way he planned clinical protocols with documentation and sequencing and measurable objectives. Feeling it. The accumulated sense of 9 months of daily observation condensing into a direction. The specific knowledge, which he had learned to trust precisely because it was built from 1,000 small data points, rather than a single moment, that Sandra's body had arrived at a threshold her mind hadn't fully crossed yet. He had seen this before. Not often, perhaps 4 times in his clinical work, twice in his army experience. The patient whose nervous system had rebuilt sufficient function for a task they did not yet believe they could perform. The gap between the physical reality and the internal belief was itself the remaining obstacle. Not a large obstacle, but a real one. She was ready, she just didn't know it yet. He arrived at 6. She was already there. She had been arriving earlier recently, not for the work specifically, or not only for the work. The room had become something she came to, because it was the place where she was most simply herself, where the task was clear and the feedback was honest, and no one was watching for signs of weakness or strength or anything except what was actually happening. She was standing beside the parallel bars when he came in, not holding them. Beside them the way someone stands near a railing they no longer need but haven't fully acknowledged not needing. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning." He put his bag down, took out his documentation forms, then put them back. She noticed immediately. No paperwork. Today is different. She looked at him with the attention she brought to things that mattered. "What are we doing?" He moved 2 chairs into the center of the room, set them facing each other, approximately 12 feet apart, sat in one, looked at her, walked to me. She looked at the distance. 12 feet of open floor, no bars within reach. The walker was against the wall by the door where he had left it. He hadn't brought it out to the center of the room, and she registered this. "Darnell, your proprioceptive integration scores have been where they need to be for 3 weeks. You've held 35 seconds without support in each of the last 4 sessions. Your left hip flexor group normalized 5 weeks ago. The balance work we've been doing since month 7 was specifically building toward this. You could have told me you were building toward this, I'm telling you now." She looked at the 12 feet between them. He could see the calculation happening, not physical. She was past the point where the physical calculation was the limiting factor, the other kind. The one that happened in the part of the mind that had spent 9 months reorganizing itself around a new understanding of what was possible, and was now being asked to take one more step in that reorganization. "What if I fall?" "Then you fall and I help you up and we try again. That's the complete plan?" "That's the complete plan." She was quiet. He waited. He had learned to wait with the quality of attention that made waiting feel like its own form of support, not absence, not pressure. Presence. Sandra Anderson did not need long. She straightened. One deliberate breath, the kind she had learned over 9 months to use as a precise tool rather than a nervous habit. She took a step. Her right foot moved forward, made contact with the floor, took her weight, held. Second step, left foot, the slight lateral adjustment of someone finding their balance in real space, without a rail to triangulate from. Not a stumble, a correction, the body doing what bodies do when they remember how to work. Third step, fourth. He watched her face, watched the exact moment he had learned to identify it when conscious management of movement gave way to something older and more automatic. The moment when the brain stopped directing and started remembering. The transition from effort to motion, 5th step, 6th. Her arms were slightly away from her sides, the natural counterbalance of a body finding its way through space. Her pace was slow and deliberate. Every contact was intentional. 7th step, 8th, she was 4 feet from him. 9th step, she was close enough that he could have reached her easily if anything changed. 10th step, she stopped, standing directly in front of him, both feet flat on the floor. No bar, no wall, no hand within reach of anything. Just herself in the center of a room, having walked 12 feet on legs that 9 months ago moved 4 degrees on a good day. The room held the silence for a long moment. Then Sandra Anderson, who had run a 400-person company from a wheelchair for 9 months, without once allowing anyone to see her doubt, who had built her professional life on the discipline of not showing her hand, who had spent 15 years being brilliant and precise and controlled, because that was what the world she operated in required, put her face in both hands and cried. Not the managed kind, not the brief, controlled acknowledgement of emotion that she sometimes permitted herself. The other kind. The kind that came from somewhere below management, from the part of a person that doesn't have a protocol for joy that has been deferred for this long. Darnell stood up slowly. He put both hands on her shoulders. 10 steps, he said. She nodded, face still in her hands. 10 steps more than the ceiling they gave you. She nodded again, and you did it. He waited until she lowered her hands and looked at him. Her face was completely open, no control, no management, just the thing underneath. Not me. Not the protocol. Not the documentation or the clinical site or the supervised practicum designation. You. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she took one more step, the smallest one. Not a rehabilitation step, but a different kind entirely, and leaned against him. He held her. Outside the window on the south wall, Atlanta was beginning its morning. The light coming up pale and clean over the buildings to the east. Traffic beginning to build on the streets below. The city doing what it did every morning, resuming, continuing, entirely unaware that something significant had just happened in a room on the 46th floor of a building. It moved around without noticing. It had happened regardless. Darnell's apartment, East Atlanta. A Friday evening. 8 weeks later, the ring had been in the top drawer of his dresser for 5 weeks. Not Denise's ring. That one was in a small wooden box on the bedroom shelf, and it would stay there. It was Zoe's would be. Zoe's when she was old enough and wanted it. That ring belonged to the life he and Denise had built, and to the daughter who was the best thing that life had produced, and to no one else. This was a different ring, made by a jeweler on Edgewood Avenue, who worked out of a small studio above a dry cleaner, and who had spent 40 minutes with Darnell, going over exactly what he wanted before beginning. The setting was simple. Darnell had been specific about that. A single stone in a clean, unornamented setting. The stone was a deep blue sapphire, Denise had once said. During a conversation, Darnell remembered with the specific clarity that certain conversations held permanently. They had been sitting on the fire escape of their first apartment, summer. Zoe not yet conceived that sapphire was the color of things that lasted. She had been talking about a ring she had seen in a shop window. He had filed the comment without knowing why. Some things stayed because they needed to. He had thought about the ring carefully for 3 weeks before going to the jeweler, had asked himself the questions that the decision deserved. Was this the right time? Was this fair to Zoe? Would introducing this change be something she could absorb well? Would it add to her life or complicate it? Was this fair to Sandra? Was he reading her accurately? Was he certain enough of what she wanted to ask her directly? Was he projecting his own readiness onto a situation he was hoping was mutual? He had gone back and forth with the rigor he brought to clinical decisions, which meant he had examined the question from multiple angles and tested his assumptions against the evidence. Then Zoe had come home from school with a drawing. 4 figures in crayon on green construction paper. A tall figure labeled Daddy in large, careful letters. A smaller figure labeled Zoe. A figure labeled Sandra. And above them, slightly to the right, a small orange shape with lines coming off it like a sun, or perhaps like something else. "Who's that?" he had asked, pointing to the orange shape. "Mommy Denise," Zoe had said. "She's up there watching. She's happy." He had looked at the drawing for a long time. The next day he had gone to the jeweler on Edgewood Avenue. He had not planned the Friday evening as a grand occasion. Sandra had said once, in the context of a conversation about something else entirely, a Morrison Capital Communications strategy, actually. which made the memory specific that she distrusted orchestrated moments, that she trusted the things that happened in the ordinary course of real life more than the things that were arranged for effect. He had filed this the way he filed things that mattered. So it was a Friday evening. Zoe was at Miss Claudette's for a sleepover, which happened often enough that it was normal rather than conspicuous. Sandra had come over after work. She did this regularly now, arriving with her laptop bag and whatever she was working on, settling into the apartment with the easy familiarity of someone who had stopped being a guest some weeks ago. They had cooked together, which in practice meant Darnell cooked, while Sandra sat at the kitchen counter and offered technical commentary on his decisions, which he absorbed and largely ignored in the specific, affectionate way he also absorbed and largely ignored Zoe's opinions about the spinach in the eggs. Sandra had observed this dynamic and noted, dryly, that she was not certain she appreciated being placed in the same category as a 5-year-old. He had not offered a reassuring response. After dinner they washed dishes together. Sandra washed, Darnell dried, an arrangement they had arrived at organically and maintained because it worked. The walker was against the wall near the door, available if she wanted it, increasingly left there. They moved to the couch. Sandra had her feet up. She had started doing this some weeks ago, the posture of someone who had fully stopped treating a place as a temporary location and was simply comfortable in it. The television was on, providing background rather than content. Neither of them was watching it. Darnell reached under the far couch cushion. He had put the ring there 2 hours before she arrived. He was not opposed to a small amount of preparation. She felt the movement beside her. "What are you?" He held the ring up between them, in the lamplight, not on one knee, not with a speech already assembled, not with a restaurant and a waiter standing by to bring champagne at a pre-arranged signal. Just the ring, held up, in the ordinary light of his living room on a Friday evening. She looked at it. Then at him. "The stone," she said. "Sapphire." Denise said once it was the color of things that last. I remembered that. Sandra was very still. "I had something prepared," he said, "in my head. A whole organized version of what I wanted to say. But when I rehearsed it, it sounded like a presentation. And you make a specific face when someone is presenting at you instead of talking to you. I don't make a face. You make a face. I have a thoughtful expression. It's a face." He turned toward her fully. "So I'm going to say the actual thing instead." She was quiet. "I came into your office 11 months ago with a cleaning cart and told you I would help you walk again. That was true. I believed it and I meant it. But I didn't account for what else was going to happen in that room. Because I'm methodical, but I'm not omniscient." A pause. "You are the most honest person I have been in a room with in a very long time. You don't say things you don't mean. You don't perform. You're demanding and fair, and you're funny in a way that only appears when you forget to be the CEO. You are extraordinary with my daughter in the specific way that matters. Most. You pay her complete attention, and she knows it. And it has made her trust you in a way that she doesn't manufacture for people." He held her gaze. "Zoe drew a picture of our family last week. All 4 of us, her, me, you, and Denise, watching from somewhere above. She didn't ask me whether that picture was accurate. She drew what she believed was true." He looked at the ring, then back at her. "I want to build something with you. A real life, not a carefully managed situation. I want Zoe to grow up in a home that has more people in it who love her. I want to do the work that matters to me alongside someone who understands why it matters. And I think Denise, who was the most generous person I knew, about the things that genuinely deserve generosity, would have found you slightly terrifying in the best possible way and would have loved you for it." Sandra looked at the ring for a long moment, then at him. "You said you didn't have a speech," she said. "That wasn't a speech. It had structure and an emotional arc." Sandra. "Yes," she said. "Yes, that's a yes. A complete, unambiguous yes." She looked at him with the expression she used when a question had been answered conclusively. "You can stop looking like you're waiting for additional data." He slid the ring onto her finger. She looked at her hand, the deep blue of the stone in the lamplight. Then at him. "Zoe is going to be completely insufferable about this," she said. "Absolutely. She'll say she predicted it. She did predict it. She was 5. She predicted it at 5. She's going to remind us of that for the rest of our lives." "Yes," he agreed. "She is." Sandra looked at the ring one more time. Then she leaned her head against his shoulder. Not announcing it, not making it a moment, just doing the thing because it was where she wanted to be. He put his arm around her. Outside, East Atlanta went about its Friday evening. Music from somewhere down the block, someone's speaker on a porch, unhurried. A car moving through slowly with its windows down. The ordinary ambient sound of ordinary life, which was, Darnell had come to understand, not ordinary at all. Inside, two people sat in a small apartment in the particular quiet of people who have said what needed to be said and are simply, without performance or ceremony, content. Cooper Anderson Rehabilitation Center, Atlanta, the following year. And 5 years after that, the Cooper Anderson Rehabilitation Center opened on a Tuesday morning in March. Not with ceremony. Not with a ribbon and photographers and a catered reception. The doors opened at 8 o'clock in the morning, and the first patient came in at 8:17, which was how it should be. The work was the point, and the work began as soon as someone needed it. His name was Kevin Moore, 31 years old. He had grown up in Decatur, enlisted at 19, done 2 tours. The IED that ended his active service also fractured his T11 vertebra, leaving him with an incomplete spinal injury that the VA rehabilitation program had managed competently but not ambitiously. His VA benefits covered 60% of the intensive rehabilitation cost his injury actually required. The remaining 40% the specialized neurological stimulation work, the proprioceptive integration protocol, the twice-weekly sessions that the research said made the difference between marginal improvement and meaningful function was not covered. He had a daughter named Maya. She was 4 years old. He had told Darnell this at the end of their intake consultation, not as an appeal but as a fact about his life. The way people stated important facts when they were trusting someone with something real. His daughter was starting kindergarten in 18 months. He wanted to walk her to school on her first day. Darnell had reviewed Kevin's injury profile, his baseline assessment, his existing physical condition, his cognitive engagement with the intake materials. Kevin had read everything Darnell sent him in advance, all of it, and had arrived at the intake with specific questions and his motivation architecture, which was as clear and load-bearing as anything Darnell had seen. 18 months is an aggressive target, Darnell had said. I want to be honest about that. Kevin had nodded. I know, but it's not outside the range of what the data suggests is possible for your injury profile, given the right protocol and consistent engagement. That's what I needed to hear, Kevin said. Not a guarantee. Just possible. The center's structure was Sandra's architecture, built on Darnell's clinical framework, the 2 areas where each of them was genuinely excellent, combined without either diminishing the other. The first floor served private pay patients at market rate. The work was excellent, evidence-based, individualized, serious, and it generated the revenue that kept the building operating. The second floor ran on a subsidized model. Veterans, uninsured patients, workers whose employer coverage had meaningful gaps. The subsidy came from 3 sources: the first floor's operating margin, an Anderson Industries corporate social responsibility designation that Sandra had structured with the precision of someone who understood that good intentions without sound business architecture produced things that couldn't sustain themselves, and a donor base that Sandra was building with the same methodical, long-term attention she brought to every initiative she believed in. Lorraine Mitchell was the first significant external donor. She had called Sandra 8 months after the board meeting. She had asked to see the center's business plan. She had read it in full, sent back 6 pages of notes. Lorraine's notes were always thorough, and then called again. The model is sound, she had said. The subsidized floor isn't charity. It's a sustainable structure with multiple revenue streams supporting the mission. Leonard would have approved. Leonard was your husband, Sandra said. He was. He would have liked this. A pause. He would have liked what you built with Cooper, too. He believed people were capable of more than they were generally given credit for. She had written a check. Significant enough that Darnell had to sit down when Sandra told him the number. She said the facility should be named after the work. Not the donors, Sandra said. She doesn't want her name on anything. What does she want? She wants 10 clinical fellowship positions funded annually. Students from programs like yours, from backgrounds like yours, who need financial support to complete their hours. Sandra looked at him. She wants them called the Leonard Holloway Clinical Fellows. Darnell sat with that for a moment. That's exactly right, he said. Kevin Moore walked his daughter to school on her first day of kindergarten. He sent Darnell a photograph the same afternoon. Kevin standing on a sidewalk in morning light. Maya beside him in a dress with white flowers, backpack larger than she looked like she should be able to carry, face turned up toward her father with an expression of absolute trust. Kevin was walking. Not without effort, there was still a slight compensatory pattern on the left side that they were continuing to address. But he was walking, on a sidewalk in the morning with his daughter. Darnell printed the photograph, put it on the wall of his office at the center. It was the first thing on the wall. He added to the wall over time, other photographs, other mornings, other people who had been told where their ceiling was and had found it elsewhere. But Kevin and Maya stayed in the upper left corner, where he saw them first every morning when he came in. The wedding was Sandra's to organize, which meant it was executed with complete precision and zero elements that didn't serve a clear purpose. 40 people, a botanical garden 20 minutes from the city, an afternoon ceremony with dinner after. Every detail chosen because it was right, not because it was expected. Zoe had selected her own dress. She had consulted Sandra on the options, a serious 2-hour consultation that Sandra had described to Darnell afterward, with a mixture of amusement and genuine respect, and had arrived at her final decision independently and announced it as settled. It was the deep blue of sapphire, because Mummy Denise said blue is for things that last, she told Darnell when she showed him. And this family is going to last. He had not been able to speak for a moment. Daddy, Zoe's voice was patient, the patience of someone who had watched adults have emotions and understood they needed reasonable time. It's a happy day. Crying is okay. He had laughed and pulled her into a hug, and she had allowed it for exactly the right amount of time before informing him that he was going to wrinkle her dress. The botanical garden was full of afternoon light. The ceremony was simple and direct, with vows they had written themselves. Sandra's precise, Darnell's honest in the particular way of someone who had stopped being careful about the difference between what he felt and what he said. Brenda Wright was in the third row. She had told Sandra 2 days before the wedding that she had no intention of crying because she was a professional. She was crying before Sandra reached the midpoint of the aisle and did not appear to find this inconsistent with her professional identity. Sandra walked the full length of the aisle without assistance of any kind. She had practiced it once, the week before, in the clinical site. Not for confidence, she had confidence in her body now in a way that had become ordinary rather than remarkable. She had practiced it to make sure she was walking the way she wanted to walk, at her own pace, without performing anything, just moving through space the way she moved through space, which was hers. Darnell watched her come toward him. 11 months ago, she had taken 10 steps across this room and wept for what those steps cost and what they meant. He had watched her then with the specific attention of a clinician who understood exactly what voluntary motor output in an incomplete T12 injury represented at month 9. He watched her now, with something that had nothing to do with clinical attention, the uncomplicated love of someone who had chosen a person and meant it, who had watched her rebuild herself from the inside out, with the same consistency and honesty that she brought to everything she did, who had discovered, over 11 months of 6 a.m. sessions and board meeting eventualities and Saturday afternoons and take-out containers on bare floors, that she was exactly the person she appeared to be, which was rare, and which he valued more than he had adequate language for. When she reached him, she took his hands. "You're crying," she said. "Zoe told me it was allowed." Zoe is frequently right, completely right in this case. Sandra smiled. The real one. The one that had nothing managed in it. 5 years later. A Thursday evening in November. The Cooper Anderson Center's 5th annual gala, not a rented space anymore, but the event hall on the ground floor that Sandra had incorporated into the building's design when they expanded 18 months in, because she had been certain from the beginning that this was going to be something that lasted, and that lasting things needed permanent homes. The room was full. Donors, former patients, medical professionals from 3 hospital systems, students from 4 PT programs, members of the VA rehabilitation network that the center had formally partnered with 2 years prior. The kind of room that took years of consistent work to fill, not with attendance, but with the specific quality of belief that made people come back. Kevin Moore was there. He came to every gala, Not because anyone had asked him to, but because he wanted to. He walked without any compensatory pattern now had for 2 years. He was 3 semesters into a pre-med program at Georgia State. Going at night while working during the day, Maya in 2nd grade, and apparently thriving in the specific, complete way that children thrive when the person raising them is well. Lorraine Mitchell was there. She and Sandra had developed, over 5 years, something that was not friendship in the easy sense. Both of them were too self-contained for easy friendship, but was genuine and mutual and valuable to both of them. The kind of relationship built from the honest acknowledgement of having initially misread each other and the shared decision to correct for it. Brenda Wright was at the operations table near the entrance, running the evening's logistics with the efficiency that had characterized her entire professional life, occasionally scanning the room to confirm that everything was where it should be. Occasionally looking at Sandra with an expression that she did not appear to know was, on her face, the expression of someone who is proud of something they helped build, and has the wisdom to be quiet about it. Zoe was at a table near the back wall, 10 years old. In a deep blue dress she wore blue to every gala, had since the first one, without being asked and without explaining. She had a notebook open in front of her, and was writing with the focused intensity she had brought to every project she had ever undertaken, which was the same intensity Darnell brought to clinical work and Sandra brought to everything else, and which appeared in Zoe to be the natural synthesis of both. Sandra sat down beside her. "What are you working on?" "My speech," Zoe said, without looking up. "For tonight? For later?" "For when I run something." Sandra looked at the notebook. The handwriting was large and careful, the letters of someone who was still developing the motor precision to match the speed of her thinking. The page was full. "Can I read it?" Zoe considered this with genuine deliberation. "Not yet. It's not ready. Fair enough." Zoe put down her pen and looked at Sandra with the directness that had been characteristic of her at 5 and had not diminished with age. If anything, it had deepened the directness of someone who had always been told that what she thought mattered and had learned to trust that. "Mommy, Sandra." "Yeah. Did you know, when you first met Daddy, that it was going to become all of this?" Sandra considered the question honestly, the way she considered everything. "No," she said. "I thought he was going to clean the office and leave. I almost told him to leave before he finished talking." "Why didn't you?" "Because he asked me a question that nobody had asked me in a long time. And the way he asked it, he actually wanted the answer. Not the answer that would make the conversation easier. The real answer." Zoe thought about this. "What was the question?" "He asked me when I had last taken a real break." "That doesn't seem like a big question." "It wasn't big," Sandra said. "It was the right one. Sometimes those are different things." Zoe absorbed this with the serious attention she gave to things worth keeping. "I think Mommy Denise sent him," she said. "To you." "On purpose." Sandra looked at her. "Why do you think that?" "Because she was the kind of person who would. Daddy told me she thought about other people first. Like, before she thought about herself. She would have wanted him to find someone. She would have thought about it and figured out how to make it happen." "She sounds remarkable." "She was," Zoe said simply. "She is. She's still around. She just looks different now." Sandra was quiet for a moment. Outside, the room filled with conversation and warmth. The particular warmth of people gathered around something they had built together or been part of or been changed by. "I think you might be right," Sandra said. Zoe looked satisfied. She picked up her pen and went back to her speech. Darnell found Sandra 20 minutes later. She was standing near the window on the room's east wall, standing easily, the way she stood now, which was simply the way she moved through the world, unremarkable to her and remarkable to no one who hadn't known her before, except when she thought about it, which was less often than it used to be. He came to stand beside her. "You okay?" "Very okay." He looked out the window with her. The parking lot, the Atlanta skyline beyond it, lit against the November dark, not the sweeping, anonymous nighttime skyline of a city that didn't know them, but this specific city, this specific skyline, the one they had built something in. 5 years ago, he had pushed a cleaning cart down a marble hallway on the 47th floor of a building downtown and seen a thin line of light under a door at the far end. He had knocked. He had made a promise he wasn't completely certain he could keep, to a woman who had stopped letting herself want the thing he was promising. In an office at 11 o'clock at night, with a cleaning cart in the hallway behind him. He had kept the promise, but what he had not known standing in that office with his whole careful, methodical, direction-oriented future arrayed in front of him was that the promise was about more than walking. The way all real promises were about more than their stated terms. They were about showing up, being consistent, doing the work when the outcome was uncertain, and the only thing you had was the decision to continue. He had learned that from a man in a hospital hallway who kept getting up. He had practiced it for 9 months in a room on the 47th floor, and then in a room on the 46th floor, and then in every room that had come after. He was still practicing it. That was how it worked. You didn't finish. You continued. Zoe is writing her speech, Sandra said. I saw. She wouldn't let me read it either. She said it's not ready. She's been saying that for 3 weeks. Some things take as long as they take, Sandra said. He looked at her. She turned from the window. The way she looked at him, the specific quality of it, which existed nowhere else in her life and which he had first seen clearly on the morning she took 10 steps across a bare room and lowered her face into her hands, was simply present. No management, no performance. The thing itself, no regrets, she asked. The question they had asked each other many times, in many versions, across 5 years. He thought about a hospital floor and a decision made in silence. He thought about a door with light under it. He thought about a woman who had said, "Don't make me regret trusting you," and had not regretted it. He thought about a daughter who had drawn a family portrait with 4 figures and been completely right. He thought about Kevin Moore on a sidewalk in the morning light. He thought about a sapphire ring and a small voice in a graduation ceremony, and a 10-year-old writing a speech for the future she was absolutely certain she was going to have. Not one, he said. Sandra leaned her shoulder against his. He put his arm around her. Outside, Atlanta went on being itself in November, the city alive and warm and full of its own ordinary, extraordinary life. Inside, the room held the sound of people gathered around something real. It had started with a small question asked at 11 o'clock at night. When did you last take a real break? Such a small question, such an enormous answer.